You're listening to the Republic Broadcasting Network, because you can handle the truth.
Welcome to the What Really Happened radio show. Putting America first, second, and third. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show. It's Friday, July 19th, 2013, getting toward the end of the month here, end of the week. Thank goodness it's Friday. Thank goodness it's Friday. Pow Hana Friday, ready to go into the weekend here. We got a lot of stuff to talk about today. It's a very busy news day, a couple of anniversaries from tomorrow we're going to comment on. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. 800-313-9443. Sam is sitting in our control room, twiddling the dials, keeping us out of trouble, ready to answer the phone when you call on in. Now, tomorrow, of course, is July 20th, and it's the anniversary of a couple of overlapping events. They all sort of pile on that day, and, of course, tomorrow's the anniversary of the day that Apollo 11 landed on the moon. And it's rather interesting that we've seen in recent weeks where the Congress is getting ready to declare that Apollo 11 landing site a National Historic Landmark. And first of all, this is a non-starter because under international treaty, the United States does not own the moon and therefore cannot declare a national historical landmark on the moon any more than they could on, for example, Antarctica. And this is really little more than a pathetic attempt by the current government to bask in past glories of when the United States was great and a leader in space and able to accomplish these amazing things, as Kennedy said, not because they're easy, but because they're hard. And it's actually, I think it's backflashing because it's reminding Americans in the world the United States has lost the capability for manned space flight. We're having to hitch rides with the Russians to get up to the space station. This last week, one of the astronauts on a spacewalk almost drowned when water started floating into the helmet. And because it's just floating there, mixing with the air, was a very, very critical situation. And more than likely, the cooling layer of the spacesuit, which involves tubes of water that circulate around to maintain the temperature inside the spacesuit, that ruptured, and it's a huge embarrassment. It's very, very dangerous, this idea you could be out in space in a vacuum and still drown here. Now, tomorrow, of course, is also the anniversary of the landing on Mars of Viking 1, which I was involved with as part of the imaging team, and it's rather interesting all these years later that most scientists around the world are pretty much convinced that Viking did indeed find indigenous life on Mars. And for various political reasons, NASA was discouraged from saying, yes, they did. And it may have to do with the fact that our government does not want any kind of socially transformative event to occur that would take our focus off whatever it is the government was trying to do here. The entire world absolutely knew for a fact there was life on other worlds. They might put down their guns and weapons and say, let's stop quarreling amongst ourselves. Let's go out there and find out who else is out there. But NASA was hemming and hawing. They just arbitrarily tossed out the results from the labeled release experiment developed by Dr. Gilbert Levin. And this is a system that is in wide use around the world to detect bacterial contamination of civil water supplies. It's not a one-time only experiment. It's an established technology with a track record of always working. And NASA relied on the results from the gas chromatograph mass spectrometer, which failed to detect organic molecules. Well, we now know, because of the high perchlorate content of the Martian soil, that experiment could never have worked. And so it was a false negative. And other scientists in other countries have looked at the original raw data and said, yeah, you guys found life. And NASA's unwilling to admit error. That's why many people think the acronym NASA stands for Never a Straight Answer. Now, when we come back from this commercial break, we're going to be talking about another anniversary tomorrow, which is the murder of White House Deputy Counsel Vincent Foster. It's the 20th anniversary. Can't believe it's been that many years since I stumbled on this and all the stuff that followed. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And as I mentioned before going into the commercial break, tomorrow is the 20th anniversary of the murder of White House Deputy Counsel Vincent Foster. This was the story that actually got me started inadvertently down this path of being a truth activist and a blogger. Although the official anniversary of my blogging career is actually next March 11th, which is when the White House leaked to Reuters News a photo showing Vincent Foster's hand lying there in Fort Marcy Park next to this dark blued steel revolver with which he was supposed to have committed suicide. Now, I spent pretty much most of my life working in motion picture visual effects. And it was my job to know what makes things look real and what do not. And the instant I saw that picture, just flashed on the TV screen, I looked up at it and I said, this thing's a fake. There are so many problems with that photo. Mostly involving the fact that when you put a gun in your mouth and pull the trigger, there's a lot of debris that comes out. And Foster was wearing a white shirt, which was completely devoid of any blood spatter whatsoever. And so I did a little digging, and I found the FBI's FD 302 form regarding the interview with Foster's widow, Lisa Foster, in which the FBI tried to create a case that Lisa Foster recognized the gun found with her husband's body as Vincent Foster's own gun that he had inherited from his father. The problem being the gun that Vince Foster inherited was silver-colored, was not dark-blued. And the FBI interviewers, writing down their notes, kept saying over and over, silver-colored gun, silver-colored gun, silver-colored gun, even though clearly the gun found with the body was dark-blued steel. This isn't Lisa Foster making a mistake because she doesn't know gun. These are the trained FBI interviewers who kept selling that idea. And, of course, that interview with Lisa Foster, with all mention of the gun color deleted, was the foundation for the claim that Vincent Foster was really very depressed, and he just killed himself. And I shared that with some friends. I was working at a visual effects company that shared the same building with CNN Hollywood. And during lunch, we had this little outdoor cafe that we all shared. And I had a hard copy of that photo that was leaked about Vince Foster and the gun. And I was showing it to my coworkers and explaining why this had to be a fake. And I remember very clearly some people from CNN at the next table listening very closely to what I was saying. And that very same night, we started getting threatening phone calls, and my career in Hollywood simply evaporated. And all of a sudden, since I had a lot of free time on my hands, I started looking into some other areas where we were not being told the truth about what was going on. So here we are. It's been almost 20 years later. And it's certainly not a course in life I ever intended to follow, but it was the course in life which was, well, the only option available to me. And so here we are all these years later. Now, interestingly enough, over at RINF.com, there's an article about how the FBI has been forced to review thousands of criminal cases, including 27 death penalty convictions that may have been secured using faulty and exaggerated testimonies that fraudulently linked defendants to crimes. So here we have the FBI itself admitting that, yeah, there were mistakes made, meaning somebody lied. And they're going back and looking at all these cases here, and there may have been 27 death penalties, wrongful death penalties, wrongful executions. And this is why I cannot support capital punishment. We know the system is flawed. We know that convictions are secured by ambitious politicians who want to run for mayor and governor. We know that political expediency comes into play. Bruno Richard Hauptmann, who was executed for the Lindbergh kidnapping, it's now recognized that he got railroaded for that because the government had to prove to America that the bad guys are always caught and punished. Even if it's not really the bad guy, we'll fry him up as an offering to our propaganda image here. And as long as the FBI is, in fact, admitting that these things do go on and looking back at old cases where fraud occurred, clearly, using the FBI's own FD 302 forms, we can prove fraud in the case of Vincent Foster. And it does need to be done. I remember one of the most absurd things that came out of that case. A lawyer named Alan Favish filed a Freedom of Information Act request for the crime scene photos of Vincent Foster because documents surfaced that there was actually a second gunshot wound on the body, which would have seriously undermined the claim that he committed suicide. And this case went all the way to the United States Supreme Court, which ruled against Alan Favish, more or less on the grounds that dead people have a right to privacy. And right to privacy is one of the exemptions to the Freedom of Information Act. And that was kind of where that ended. Of course, in this post-Saddam weapons of mass destruction environment, we all understand the government lies to us about pretty much everything. And looking back, it's easy to see the lies and deception and fraud regarding the murder of Vincent Foster. Why was he killed? Well, it all goes back to the Presidential Blind Trust. Under U.S. law, if you are elected president, you have to put all of your financial holdings into a blind trust. You're not allowed to play with your own money, lest your own financial interests influence your decision-making. They should do that with all of Congress. We know from testimony that came out during the Whitewater hearings that the Clintons did not put all of their wealth into the blind trust. And the blind trust forms, which are supposed to be completed and all the wealth transferred to the trustee on Inauguration Day, were still sitting on Vince Foster's desk 6 months after the Clintons moved into the White House. Now, Vince Foster, had he known that blind trust declaration was fraudulent, it's his rear end on the line. If it was exposed as a fraud, he's the one who would go to jail for it. And the indications are that he intended to resign. He had an appointment scheduled with President Clinton for the 21st. But on the 20th, his body was found in Fort Marcy Park. 2 days later, the blind trust declarations showed up at the trustee, and the cover-up began. So that's kind of where all of this goes back to. And again, I did not set out to become a truth advocate, critic of the government. Just sort of happened, entirely by accident here. All righty, now then, the corporate media and even Obama, he just had a surprise appearance at a White House briefing. Just walked in and said, I want to talk about Trayvon Martin. They're trying to push that again. Jesse Jackson is out there saying that we should look at Florida as an apartheid state because obviously they were racist in letting Zimmerman go and not bringing justice to Trayvon Martin. And they're still fanning this thing. They're trying to push racism as a problem in America. No, it isn't. The absence of riots last weekend proves that. This was all being fanned up, continues to be fanned up in the hope that Americans will be distracted from IRS Gate, DOJ Gate, NSA Gate, Prison Gate, Benghazi Gate, the economy, the wars, blah, blah, so forth and so on. So there's a White House press briefing, and Obama does a surprise appearance to basically talk about Trayvon Martin, and he's pushing this thing, oh, violence is bad, violence is bad. He's trying to put that meme out there. Racism is a problem, but, we do have changing attitudes, and we've got to work on making sure that, we're more racially sensitive. And looking at his body language and his face, it is very obvious he has come to realize that this attempt to fan up Trayvon Martin as a distraction from all of the scandals surrounding his administration has failed. I think he just said, I got a few minutes, I'm going to pop into the briefing and try and revive Trayvon Martin. He's in there telling all of these journalists, this is what you should be talking about. Don't talk about all this other stuff. Talk about Trayvon Martin and racism. And he was pushing it so hard, even the Fox News commentators, following up on his appearance, were asking if Obama thought he was easing racial tension or if, in fact, he was encouraging it with his speech. And remember, Judicial Watch uncovered documents proving Obama's Department of Justice, it's part of the executive branch, the Department of Justice spent taxpayer dollars encouraging and supporting the protests against Zimmerman. They were manufacturing this as a racial crisis right from day one. Now, I've mentioned this before, but I'm going to mention it again. If you see a politician or anybody, clergy, whatever, up on TV explaining their latest scandal, turn off the volume. and just look at their face and their body language. Don't listen to the words they're saying. Look at their body language, and that will tell you a very great deal about what's going on inside their mind. And doing this with Obama on this speech, looking at his face, he knows he's in trouble. He did not take attention off of all of these scandals, the NSA spying, the IRS targeting of dissidents and conservatives. And he's in trouble. He didn't get his mass race riots that the corporate media was trying to sell to all of us. Good. Good. This is not how you govern a country with managed public relations. You govern the country by managing the country for the benefit of the country and its people. So it's all catching up with him here. Now, interesting little story coming out of the Boston bombing case. As you're probably aware, everybody was sort of trying to kick up a fuss over the fact that Rolling Stone magazine put Dzhokhar Tsarnaev's photo on their cover, giving him the rock star treatment. I'm not sure that's what was intended, but that's the way it's being fanned. In response, other photos have been released to try and re-demonize Dzhokhar, and it's backflashed dramatically. More when we come back from these commercials. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show, and I know we've got a caller on the line. I'm going to get to you in just a minute here. We're talking about the Boston bombing and how people reacted negatively to Rolling Stone magazine putting Dzhokhar Tsarnaev on the cover. Nice picture, just showing him as an ordinary person. And everybody's screaming, you're giving him the rock star treatment. He's not a hero. He's a villain. So apparently one of the police officers up in Boston took it upon himself to leak out photos and videos of the arrest of Dzhokhar Tsarnaev, where he's obviously he's got blood. He's he's crawling out of the boat. He's being arrested in order to try and visually re-demonize him in the eyes of the American public, who are already beginning to question that official story. And it backfired, because in the photos that were leaked, the videos that were leaked, there is no throat wound visible. Now remember when Dzhokhar was arrested, and we were all told, oh, he had a wound to his throat. He can't talk. He can't be interviewed. Nobody can talk to him. You know, he's answering questions in writing and code signs and all the rest of it. And that's why he's not going to be able to speak to the public in his own defense. And now we know that's another lie in this story. They're still trying to claim that this gentleman they shot down in Florida, that the FBI murdered down in Florida, and now they're blocking release of the autopsy on that. Oh, he was on the verge of linking the Tsarnaev brothers to this drug murder. Really, you should just go ahead and assume that these are bad people and pay no attention to those bloggers and independent media who are pointing out those silly little conspiracy wacko tinfoil hat facts, like the fact that the bombs were in black backpacks and photos of the Tsarnaevs in the area showed them wearing gray backpacks. You shouldn't pay attention to things like that at all, along with a long history of government false flags. All right, we're going to grab a phone call here. Tony in Indiana. Aloha, Tony. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind today?
Yeah, hi, Mike. Thanks for taking my call again. I want to talk about Floodgate.
Yes.
And I know your theories behind everything, and I concur, but I just want to get your opinion on an alternative hypothesis that I've noticed in other elements of our quote-unquote movement of paleoconservatism. Anyway, I'll throw it at you and let you run with it. I guess the theory is that all this pressure is being put on Obama vis-a-vis like I said, the floodgate, to get him to wage more wars for Israel in the Middle East vis-a-vis Israel control of the mainstream media and the media narrative.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of like some people said, well, that's the whole idea behind Monica Lewinsky. It was pressure on Clinton to engage more Middle East wars, and if you didn't, we will expose you and this affair you had.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think about that?
Well, there's absolutely no question that any special interest group with access to damaging information is going to use it for whatever their particular political agenda happens to be. And I have absolutely no doubt that those who are in control of the flow of information on the corporate media could very easily be sending messages to Obama saying attack Syria and Iran now, or we're going to make it worse. But on the other hand, let us not forget that the reason those scandals are there to be politically exploited is because, in fact, the administration did carry out these crimes. Violations of the Constitution, misuse of the IRS. If you want to be free from blackmail, don't do anything that's blackmailable. Of course, we understand under our current political structure, people who can be blackmailed are the ones who are promoted to positions of power, because if you're blackmailable, you're dependable, you're reliable, you will do as you are told by the real power players on Wall Street, for example. So, I'm sure that a great deal of this has to do with putting pressure on Obama. The problem here is that the cascade is now building so rapidly. The people who are trying to manipulate these stories in order to put pressure on Obama have lost control. And it's snowballing up to the point where there's already talk of impeachment in Congress. Obama's attempt to distract us all with race riots cratered. And it's clearly the situation has evolved out of control of anybody's influence.
Okay, and I also noticed one other thing, and that there's a little caveat here with these quote-unquote Arab Springs and all these countries in the Middle East.
Mm-hmm.
Funny that none of them are in countries like UAE, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, all the paid-off puppet governments. It's always the ones that...
You noticed that, did you?
And here's the little thing here. What do you think about a quote-unquote South American spring that might just happen to Argentina and all the other countries that are commie, Marxist, mean to America with their verbiage and stuff?
Well, Argentina is definitely now on the U.S. government's special high-interest targets list because of their close association with Iran, and they're daring to reinvestigate the bombing of that Jewish community center, which now the money trail is already leading back to a Argentine government minister himself who was Jewish and pro-Israel, and that's why everybody's upset about that. But remember what we said when we talk about the dollarification of the world and forcing the world back onto petrodollar or resource dollar or Bretton Woods. It only works if they succeed in conquering all of the nations, because otherwise people are going to go to nations that are not part of that deal because they'll get their resources for less cost than going to nations that are playing the petrodollar game. Got to take a break for commercials. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. I'm looking at the Corver media, and it's all Zimmerman all the time. And following Obama's surprise appearance at the White House press briefing, now Fox News is getting the reaction, and they've got George Zimmerman's brother now is getting his airtime talking about the rule of law and so forth. So they're back there trying to sell you that this is the important story of the day, and you should only be thinking about George Zimmerman and Trayvon Martin and race relations in this country. They're desperate to get you to forget about all these other scandals. Well, we're not going to let that happen. Now, Glenn Greenwald is saying that they're getting ready to release even more information on the NSA spy program on Americans and on the world. Apparently he has a large stash of material that Edward Snowden has already given him. This is not new material coming from Snowden, because Snowden is trying to basically stay well-behaved for the benefit of his possibility of Russian asylum. And the U.S. is out there throwing tantrums about, oh, you can't do that. Obama has announced he's going to, or he's considering canceling the planned summit with Putin over the Snowden affair. I think Obama is actually using Snowden as an excuse not to go, because we remember the last meeting between Obama and Putin. You could tell from their expressions in the photos of them together. It did not go well. Obama did not get what he wanted. And he's probably realizing that this next meeting, this next summit, will be no more productive. But apparently there is more information yet to come. Now, the former chief of the NSA, Hayden, is out there screaming about all the damage that Edward Snowden has done to the United States of America with the revelation of wrongdoing. They're still trying to sort of treat it as betrayal of the United States to our enemies. Well, Snowden blew the whistle on government wrongdoing to the American people, and that's why the majority of Americans see him as a hero. And my response to Hayden is Snowden did not harm the United States of America. The National Security Agency, in violating the Fourth Amendment to the United States Constitution, did all that damage. You, the National Security Agency, do not have a right to ignore the Bill of Rights in doing what you're doing to ordinary, law-abiding American citizens. Yes, the case can be made that surveillance and espionage is necessary against the nation's true enemies, foreign governments, foreign military, but that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about constant, total surveillance of the American people, and Jimmy Carter is right. This proves we are no longer a democracy. This kind of total surveillance is the machinery of a police state. And by the way, a reminder, tomorrow is also when my latest challenge to the NSA expires. And nobody has come forward yet with the identity of the target for our marshmallows of mass destruction. And on Monday, I'll release the code and how I did it. And I'm doing this only to underscore a simple fact. Real criminals, real terrorists are not afraid of the NSA. They can conceal their communications successfully. This is all about spying on you, the American people, all without warrants, all in complete violation of the Bill of Rights to the Constitution. The government spin is, well, this special court we set up, the Foreign Intelligence Service Act Court, allows us to go around the Constitution. No, it doesn't. No agency of the federal government is allowed to go around the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. And I would remind everybody that the Foreign Intelligence Service Act includes in its name the word foreign. They don't have any domestic jurisdiction. They are only there to rubber stamp surveillance requests involving people outside the United States of America. And they're claiming to have written all these laws that allow them to do this. Well, first of all, courts are not allowed to write the law. That is the job of the United States Congress. And there is no law passed by Congress saying the NSA can spy on ordinary law-abiding citizens without warrants. And even if Congress passed such a law, it would be automatically null and void under the United States Supreme Court decision Marbury v. Madison, which says laws repugnant to the Constitution are automatically null and void. We don't have to wait for the Supreme Court to say, well, we'll look at this or we'll table it off for a couple of years and we'll get to it down the road. Now, down in New Jersey, in a part of the growing outrage in response to this NSA spying, the New Jersey Supreme Court has ruled that police do need warrants to track New Jersey citizens using their cell phone data. And the New Jersey Supreme Court ruled in a unanimous decision, cell phones are not meant to serve as tracking devices to locate their owners wherever they may be. Complete violation of the Fourth Amendment to do so. Now, this is only at the state level, and the federal government is going to ignore this under the Supremacy Clause. All righty, let's see. Jimmy Carter, we were talking about him before. Snowden's leak is useful. America has no functioning democracy, and he's absolutely right. And again, this is a former president of the United States who's out there saying this. We have descended into dictatorship. Total surveillance, total police state, massively rigged elections. We're there. I sit here sort of, almost in awe. I've been at this for almost 20 years now, warning that this stuff was coming. I'm getting all kinds of emails from people I knew 20 years ago saying, boy, we thought you were a real kook warning about all this stuff coming on. And, well, you were right. We still think you're a kook, but you were right. By golly here. Now, a little bit of good news. We were talking the other day about how owners of the World Trade Center were going to sue the airlines for allowing 9/11 to happen. This is after they got all their insurance payouts. And the question I posed earlier is, why sue the airlines? It wasn't their fault. Security at every single gate used by the hijackers on 9/11 was handled by an Israeli company, ICTS. If there was a failure that allowed 9/11 to happen, you should sue them. It's a moot point anyway, because the judge basically came back and reminded the owners of the World Trade Center that under New York state law, you cannot collect multiple times on one tragedy, one disaster. And since they've already been reimbursed by the insurance companies for the losses of 9/11, it is illegal for them to sue the airlines. So that one's dead and gone here. We're going to go to the phones here. Glenn in Philadelphia. Aloha, Glenn. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. 2 points, one about Greenwald, one about Jimmy Carter. I guess Greenwald first. It just seems very odd to me that this guy is saying the kind of things you're saying, that they are going to be releasing this information. I'm kind of wondering why they don't have warrants, why he isn't getting SWAT teamed and all that kind of stuff. How is it that he's able to continue to function as a mouthpiece on behalf of Snowden's cause without himself, getting, if he's saying this, you'd think they'd have a warrant, and be going after him, unless this stuff is distributed to other people, and there are, as you said, dead man switch trigger events or trigger dates or times that cause this stuff to be released from people who are as yet undetected. And any sort of electronic communications between them and Greenwald would be a tip-off. So it just seems very odd that they can be pulling this off without an amazing degree of secrecy, pre-planning, and data distribution.
Well, if they're doing it all on the human net, the NSA can't do a thing about it.
Snowden, that's how they have to be doing it.
Yeah, Snowden didn't transmit this stuff in the clear over the lines. He's got it on flash drives. He's, using postal. There's all kinds of ways to evade the NSA if you really want to. And obviously, Snowden is in a position to know the very best ways to do so. The NSA only knows where Snowden is because they're reading it in the newspapers.
Right. And as to Jimmy Carter, everybody seems to be interpreting Jimmy Carter's rather blunt statement about America not having a functioning democracy as necessarily being a lament. I haven't seen any stories about this. I just heard about it on talk radio. I haven't seen any facial expressions of his or statements or vocal inflections or anything. But just from the bland and blunt way it's stated, I think people have to remember Jimmy Carter is a Council on Foreign Relations member. He's one of the most personable, affable, and enigmatic characters. I vividly remember his presidency, all the bizarre events, the Iran hostage rescue thing, his brother Billy and Billy Beer, the fact that he's a peanut farmer, and an Annapolis nuclear engineering graduate who says nuclear. But
that goes back to Eisenhower. And Eisenhower mispronounced it, and everybody said, well, if that's the way the president says it, we're going to say it that way. I used to chide George W. Bush for always using the phrase nuclear. And,
exactly.
It's hardly unique.
You shouldn't be allowed to operate nuclear reactors in the Navy if you can't say that right. But there's that, and of course is the thing about him being a Christian, and the story about him having had lust in his heart. My goodness, the poor guy had. And then after his presidency, he's been out swinging a hammer for Habitat for Humanity. So he's certainly one of the most enigmatic ex-president I think that we have. But
I disagree. I disagree. I don't think he's enigmatic. I think he basically walks his talk. And because we as a nation are so used to presidents who are constantly deceptive, we just didn't know how to deal with Jimmy Carter, who was just basically upfront about everything.
That was a bad word choice on my part. How about interesting?
Yeah.
Very interesting guy. Certainly. But, and certainly you gotta, I'm not a complete fan of Habitat for Humanity. But what they do is potentially, very altruistic, but I'm not sure that building houses for people out in the middle of nowhere who are unemployed is that great. We have a lot of, I like their rehab efforts in the cities where they take, burned out messes in the city and rehab them. That's a lot more efficient.
Well, Carter is out there. He's doing what he can do where he sees the need. And we can all disagree with his particular targets and stuff. It's just like with my wife and I, we're out here with our food programs and whatnot, and maybe there are better ways that we could be trying to ameliorate the situation, but this is what we are able to do at this time with our limited resources, and so that's what we're going to go on doing.
More important, he is a Council on Foreign Relations member, and never underestimate the significance of that.
Well, I understand. Glenn, I'd like to get a few words in here. Thank you very much for the phone call. Carter was a reactionary president. He was able to get into the White House because of the huge national disgust with government as it was coming out of the Nixon scandals. And there was all that stuff going on, and a lot of people said, all right, it's time to bring in somebody who's more or less outside the system. Not totally outside, obviously. But that was really the appeal of Jimmy Carter, was that he wasn't one of the Washington, or he was not perceived as one of the Washington insiders. And I think also, sadly, when he went into the White House, he was very much out of his depth, and he didn't realize the utter ruthlessness of his opposition, which is why he got caught with that October surprise and the sabotaging of the helicopters trying to go in and get the Iranian hostages. And we all know about how people from the Bush camp were in there telling Iran, hang on to the hostages. When we get into office, we'll get you all these weapons, which led to the Iran-Contra scandal. And it was, I think Carter was a little bit out of his depth. He's an honorable man, as near as I can tell. In fact, he's the only president I would like to actually meet in person. Yeah, and but I think he was caught off guard by just how ugly politics in D.C. really can get. All righty, let's grab another phone call here real quick. John in Missouri. Aloha, John. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, I'm calling about the situation in Detroit. I'm wondering, is this really the beginning of the end for the United States, or is this just one little city?
I think it is a bellwether. It certainly has changed public perception of the United States as a whole to actually see such a large city go into bankruptcy, and it may well prove to be the first in a long series of dominoes.
It used to be quite a city.
Yes.
You know, I've drove trucks up there. There was a lot of really nice buildings. They're in decay now, but it was big 3-story homes, you know, and it's just a mess now.
It is. I mean, if you go out online and you do web searches, I mean, people have done galleries of photos of those magnificent old buildings that are being allowed to rot away. I know the TV series Life After People has used locations in Detroit for some of their segments there. We've all seen the photos of the boarded-up homes. It is a complete, absolute disaster there. Is it coming to the rest of America? Yeah, as long as we're trapped by that 11th marble. It's going to be hitting all across the United States of America. And everything this federal government has done since the crash of 2008 has been 180 degrees out of phase with what would have worked for the nation and its people. But it's perfectly in line with Wall Street's money junkies wanting to grab what's left of the money to themselves. That's why we have this little coffee mug that we sell that says, the last official act of any government is to loot the nation, and we're in the middle of that right now. Everything is geared to taking away what is left of your wealth and putting it in the pockets of the money junkies who are going to skedaddle to the Cayman Islands or any other tax shelter or nation without extradition when it all starts coming apart.
I see. You know what really surprised me about up there is when you cross over from Canada, it's right there in your face. I mean, it's so obvious. I'm surprised that the United States government allows it to look that poor as a port of entry.
They really don't care. They absolutely do not care. They're all caught up in their desire for world conquest and renewing America's greatness with a body count, and of course, constant serving of Wall Street money junkies. And the government.
Well, I guess with that as a port of entry, maybe that makes other countries not want to take us over. Anyway, thank you, Michael.
Could very well be. Who's going to invade us? What have we got that would be worth the trouble? And the answer is virtually nothing. But we know it's the United States that's carrying out all the aggressions under whatever lame excuse they can come up with. Oh, weapons of mass destruction. We're saving the people from an evil, cruel dictator. And now they're back to fanning up the terrorist meme all over again. Terrorists are hacking the 9/11 phone centers so people cannot call for help. Really? Why? Average response time for a 9/11 call in America is running about 20 minutes right now. It's not like it's going to significantly change anything. But apparently some hacker tried to blackmail one hospital by jamming their phone lines and demanding payment, and they're trying to fan this up as, oh, terrorists are after our phone systems. We must have new government agencies, blah, blah. You know, the usual thing that we see there. We're going to take another break for commercials. We'll be back after these words from our sponsor. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And I forgot to mention in hour number 3 today, of course, the lovely Lady Claire will be joining us again today to talk about her unique perspective on the world. We're going to go back and grab a couple more phone calls here. Marty in Idaho. Aloha, Marty. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind today?
I got a call this morning from a friend, a Patriot friend, so I'm hearing this secondhand. she reported that she heard, I think it was on Joyce Riley's show, that the United States, is bombing with kinetic bombs Syria. Wonder if you know anything about that and have a comment.
Well, I'm not aware right now of any direct military intervention, but we know it's coming. Apparently, John McCain was out there screaming that he was going to hold up Dempsey's renewal as our top commander until we go into Syria, and of course, inevitably, General Dempsey is now saying the tide has shifted in Assad's favor, and it's time to consider military force. So they're already playing politics with this whole situation. I do know that Syria's government is back in control of Aleppo, and so they're trying to push the panic button. But as of right now, I have no confirmation that the U.S. is bombing Syria. We know Israel has been bombing Syria on a more or less ongoing basis, so we can't rule it out. But I've heard no confirmation that the U.S. is bombing Syria at this moment.
You know what kinetic bombs are?
Well, anything that moves is kinetic. So, you know, that's kind of a null word to use. Thank you very much for the phone call. We're going to switch over to Judah in Missouri. Aloha, Judah. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
What's on my mind is that nobody's mentioned Carter's comment, no longer a free democracy. If I need any more astonishment over Carter, that would be it, because we were never intended to be a democracy. And you would think that a president, ex-president, would have been knowledgeable about that.
Well, I think you're picking at nits here, because we are supposed to be a constitutionally based republic with a democratically elected leadership. And when you go on about what that means when you have democracy, which is ruled by the people, it is that democratic process which is supposed to maintain control over that central government. But now the positions have been reversed. The government sees itself as totally in control. And again, with massive, massive runaway election fraud in this country, the elements of democracy that are part of our national structure definitely have gone away. Thank you very much. We're going to switch over to Mark in Detroit real quick before the break. Mark, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Oh, thank you. Such little time. Detroit, if you look at Detroit, a gang of men and women calling themselves Detroit, just like any other city. The United States is just a gang of men and women with U.S. T-shirts on. It was brought down by that gang of men and women that are liars and thieves. The McNamara Detroit Central Airport, those employees had a pension where they contributed 25% and the taxpayers 75%. So Detroit didn't die because Detroit died because of government.
Okay, I'm going to have to let you go. The phone connection was kind of flaky, and I'll respond to you after the station identification. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show and responding to what Mark is saying up there in Detroit. Obviously, when you have a major calamity, all the politicians and all the bankers and everybody are going to be pointing fingers elsewhere to duck the blame for decades of bad choices, poor planning, criminality, stupidity. And we've seen this before in other cities. Oh, it's all those public workers. It's all those pensions and everything. But you need to remember, pensions were being funded through investment. And back in 2008, when Wall Street put out those fraudulent mortgage-backed securities and Wall Street's owned and pet rating agencies rated them AAA, that made it legal for pension funds to invest in them, which they did. Then the mortgage-backed security fraud exploded, and pensions all of a sudden had lost billions of dollars all across the nation. And that is really one of the major contributing factors to all of these cities and states that are hovering at the edge of bankruptcy. And it's not the fault of the people who are on pensions, because that was the contract the government made with those public workers. And they can't simply back off and say, well, you're costing us too much. The money was there to fund the pensions. Pensions have been part of American life. When the economy is healthy, people get their pensions and nobody's screaming and crying about it, how the pensions are costing too much. They're just looking for something to blame, to take the heat off of Wall Street, bad government choices, Ponzi scheme central banking. They're just looking to blame the victims here, and I see this all over the place here. By the way, new wrinkle apparently in Detroit's bankruptcy. There is a story that we just received here that apparently a Michigan judge has declared that Detroit's Chapter 9 bankruptcy filing violates the state's constitution and has issued an order to Governor Rick Snyder to withdraw it. So they're in court going back and forth about whether it's even legal under the state constitution for Detroit to file for bankruptcy. So that's going to be just up in the air. And we already know if the bankruptcy moves forward, there's going to be a huge screaming debate between the bondholders and the pension recipients over who is going to have to feel the losses. And I'll tell you right now, under the current political climate, they're going to dump the losses on those pensioners. And these are people who cannot afford to lose their pensions. They're going to protect the wealth of the rich people by screwing the poor people yet again, and that is fascism. And that is why I'm opposed to it. All right, one more caller, Jack Rabbit in Virginia. Aloha, Jack. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. Yeah, regarding the bankruptcy and all that stuff. You know, it's really great to help the poor, but there's always going to be poor. But I don't see anybody helping the middle class before they become poor. There's zero help there for that. So people are losing everything they have, and everybody's running around out handing out sandwiches to people out on the streets. That's important, too. But at the same time, there's people losing everything they have because they can't find work, they can't get a refinance for their mortgage, et cetera, et cetera. So everybody's running around talking about helping the poor. The middle class are all going to be poor very shortly.
They already are. They already are. I mean, these people here on Oahu that my wife and I are helping out, they were not poor before this economic crash. We've got people out there who lost their homes, their businesses. They were middle class. There are people out there with advanced college degrees for which no jobs exist in this country anymore. The middle class are being driven down to being poor. And when I talk about helping the poor, I'm including those dispossessed, disenfranchised middle class in that group.
Yeah, I'm not beating you up for that. I just wanted to mention it. I mean, you know, we've had issues here. Same thing.
All of the 99% are suffering hardship under the current regime. No question about it. Got to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're going to grab another phone call. Andrea in Oklahoma. Aloha, Andrea. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yes, aloha. Every time, sometimes you play certain recordings, and there's one that I just heard recently. I'd never heard before. That George Carlin did about the bankers, and it's about just take one banker that they've caught doing wrong, and you use them as the example. With I mean, his skit is so much better than my quick little talk on it, but you crucify them, and it's a slow one, and they're naked, and they're upside down. He says it would stop every banker immediately. They'd be trying to toe the line and go straight. We'd see this country straighten out really fast. It's just, we've got to do something rather than letting our country dissolve into nothingness. We all have to stand up and try and save it now before it's too late. And I don't have the answers, but it was an interesting skit, and you can find it on YouTube, and it's worth listening to.
Well,
I don't know what he knew and when he knew it, but he seemed like he was, before he passed away, he knew something, and he was trying to share it with everybody.
Well, he definitely was. He'd reached that age where, you know, he had enough money to take care of himself, and he wasn't afraid to tell the truth any longer. We see that with a lot of our great creative talents like Michael Crichton. Toward the end of his career, he was writing books that were really attacking some of these horrible problems with our society, like the global warming fraud and runaway reckless deployment of genetic engineering technology. And Carlin, he was just absolutely amazing. I know one of the videos of his that we put up from time to time is the American Dream sketch. They call it the American Dream because you have to be asleep to believe it. And he's absolutely right. If our government was going to prosecute these Wall Street fraudsters, the problem would go away. But starting in 2008, when the government realized this whole mortgage-backed security fraud was going to implode. They set it as federal government policy not to investigate or arrest or charge anybody on Wall Street for this. They set it as a policy of looting, plundering the American people to cover the losses, to preserve the reputation for trustworthiness of the American banking system. And, of course, it didn't succeed. The rest of the world no longer trusts Wall Street or the American banking system or the dollar. And the American people have been plundered to no good purpose whatsoever, except, of course, for those huge, hefty bonus checks the Wall Street CEOs give themselves.
Yeah, I just thought, after WorldCom, our Senate would definitely attack that and at least help those farmers and those co-ops get their money back. I am so shocked that they didn't do diddly.
Oh, well, I'm not shocked, because you need to remember members of Congress are not subject to the law that says they have to put their wealth into a blind trust fund upon taking office. And so members of Congress vote their own stock portfolios. We saw that with TARP, where they're literally arm twisting, and they wound up violating the Constitution because the Troubled Asset Relief Program, which was really all about buying back these failed mortgage bundles and dumping them on the American people, initiated with a Senate bill and was then ratified by the House. And the Constitution says all revenue measures must originate in the House. The House had a bill. It failed. They passed one in the Senate and then arm-twisted the House to ratify it, completely unconstitutional, but they were doing it because their own stock portfolios are invested heavily in those Wall Street firms. And the richer Wall Street becomes, the richer members of Congress become. And that is all that dominates their thinking when they make these decisions regarding America's economy. They're thinking with their own stock portfolio and their own wallet. And when we talk about the blueprint for the new America, I think that all top government officials, all elected legislators, ought to agree to place their personal fortunes in a blind trust where they don't know where their money is invested, and therefore awareness of their own profit and loss will not be able to influence their decisions. But as again, going back to the Clinton administration, even the presidents don't comply with this blind trust law completely. They'll put some of their wealth in the blind trust to look good. They keep the rest to play around with, play the stock market. It's a completely corrupted and by design corruptible system. And Carlin is absolutely right. We take one of those crooked bankers and we, hang him upside down on a cross outside Wall Street and pelt him with marshmallows. The message will get there. But as long as you refuse to prosecute Wall Street crime, we will have more Wall Street crime. As of the last poll that was done by a magazine on Wall Street, 25% of those people on Wall Street admit fraud is epidemic, fraud is an accepted business practice. Without fraud, the system would have collapsed long ago.
Yeah. You keep doing a great job, Michael. I love your show.
Thank you very much for those kind words, and I'm going to keep on doing this until the problem is solved. Going to switch over to Eric in Houston. Aloha, Eric. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike Rivero.
Yes.
Just a quick question. When the dollar does collapse, where do you think these bankers are going to go, and what currency do you think is going to replace our currency when the dollar collapses?
Well, when the Federal Reserve note collapses, I think we will see local communities, counties, and states issue their own government-issued currency to go back to the banking system this nation was started with, where the government creates the currency, spends it into circulation to buy what the government needs. It flows through commerce without accruing interest to a private banker, and then is taxed back at the end of the cycle to balance the books. That is the economic system this nation was started with, and it worked really, really well until the money junkies got in and said, oh, no, put the money creation back into the hands of the private bankers. And, of course, their model is to take the public currency away from being a public utility and turn it into yet another money-making venture where all the public currency is a loan at interest, so they're making profit off of all of it, and we're constrained by law where we have no choice but to go to these private bankers for the currency that we are required to use in our daily commerce. And that's exactly what happened in the colonies when King George III passed the Currency Act. The colonies were no longer allowed to use their own currency. They had to borrow all the banknotes at interest from the Bank of England, and that was what really built the anger and rage that led to the American Revolution. Our public schools don't teach that anymore. Our public schools brainwash our kids with Tea Parties and Stamp Act and Tea Tax, But they don't mention that Currency Act. And that really was the root cause of the revolution. And we've had 3 of these private central banks. All 3 of them have brought the nation to the edge of ruin. And we're at the edge of another ruin again because of this failed experiment in banking. Now, the bankers love it. It brings them all kinds of vast wealth. And they don't have to put anything back into society to justify that wealth other than more ink and paper. And we need to get rid of that. And one of the good possibilities of the current crisis around the globe is that all of these private central banks might come crashing down together at the same time. And it presents us a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to erase this system of banking from the face of planet Earth and go back to public currency as a public utility as a model for all future banking.
I like your idea on hanging the banker upside down, Mike.
Well, that was Carlin's idea. That was Carlin's idea.
Okay. Well, thanks a lot, Mike. You answered my question.
All right, you got it. Yeah, I'm not going to steal from George Carlin, even though he's dead and can't sue. But George Carlin is one of those people where we didn't really appreciate the guy until after he'd gone away. And then we look back at his work and we say he knew. He knew what was going on, and he had the courage to speak out. And we have to applaud and remember him for that. I'm going to hunt down that video that caller was talking about because I don't think I've actually seen it. All right, the phone lines are empty. I'm going to cover a few more stories. Claire's coming in here at the top of the hour, and they're talking about more war in Syria. The Syrian forces have retaken most of Aleppo, if not all of Aleppo. Apparently, Israel has now set up one of their Iron Dome anti-missile batteries down by the Sinai. And I still think Israel is looking at the turmoil in Egypt as a possible opportunity to retake the Sinai, because they've been coveting the Sinai. We want the Sinai. We want Jordan. We want all of it. Remember, Eretz Israel, the ultimate aim for the Israeli government. If you look at the flag of Israel, those 2 blue stripes at top and bottom represent the Nile and the Euphrates River, which is the biblical description of what Israel is supposed to be. And so, Israel would welcome an opportunity to retake the Sinai. They had it once before, and they had to give it back. That's tantalizingly close to get to the Nile there. A couple of interesting stories in the news that bode ill for the Middle East. They're making a big deal over the fact that one of Schindler's actual lists, not the movie, not the DVD, but the actual list from Schindler is now being auctioned off. And it's another excuse to wave Nazis at us. Oh, the Nazis were bad. The Jews were persecuted. And every time they start waving Nazis at us, it's a sure sign Israel's going to start another war someplace. And they're looking to remind everybody about how we have to feel sorry and sympathetic for them because how they've been abused through history. Another story that they're waving around is how they finally found the palace of King David. And they're out there saying, it's indisputable proof. And it isn't indisputable. And we know Israel tries to use archaeology to bolster their claim on the lands of the Palestinians. Because what they found are some rock foundations and nothing else. They didn't find anything that said property of King David. Their entire basis for saying this is the palace of King David is it's located in the area where the Bible says David slew Goliath. And there's no other support. Could be a public market square. But they're out there trying to say, see, we found King David's palace. See, we're supposed to be here and you're not. All right, we're going to take a break for commercials, and we will be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. Now, the other day we were talking about this Muslim student who was being considered for election to the as a student regent to the Board of Governors for the University of California. Huge outcry from all these pro-Israel organizations. You can't have anybody on the governing board who's not pro-Israel. She's pro-Palestinian. You should disqualify her for that. And the comment I put up at the time was that when I was a kid, which was admittedly a long time ago, universities were places that encouraged diversity of opinion, diversity of ideas, thesis, antithesis, synthesis, in order to develop new knowledge, new thought, new policy moving into the future here. Now, the good news is, despite this huge hue and cry and screams of outrage and whining and crying and so forth, Sadia Saifuddin did, in fact, receive her appointment to the governing board as a student regent. And I think it sort of indicates that after all these decades of constant whining and crying and screaming about how everybody's got to be pro-Israel, I think people are just kind of tired of it. They're tired of the constant whining and complaining, and they're just tuning it out. It doesn't work anymore. Getting an interesting story, a member just put up here at whatreallyhappened.com. This is coming out from the Trenches World Report, where the U.S. is now authorizing preparations for a war with China. It's a very alarming development, but not unexpected. As soon as China started proposing the gold-backed yuan as a replacement for the dollar in international trade, they went on the U.S. government's special high-interest targets list. Meanwhile, over in Spain, more violent protests calling for the Prime Minister's resignation. He's in the midst of a huge corruption scandal, saying, I will not step down, it's my right to be corrupt. And the Spanish people are saying, no, it isn't. Protests are continuing down in Brazil against enforced austerity. Meanwhile, speaking of austerity, over in Greece, as you're probably aware, the money junkies agreed to recapitalize Greece to a small extent to keep them going. Not going to solve the problems, just we're going to give you enough to keep on going for a little bit longer in exchange for the Greek government approving an even more severe round of austerity. And in order to get that money, Greece has now agreed to lay off 25,000 police and teachers. And this is not going to help Greece one bit, because there are no private sector jobs for those teachers and police to go to, which means you're not going to see an increase in tax revenues. You're going to see a decline in tax revenues, and you're going to see an increase in the number of people who are requiring what little social support there is left there. But it's all to make the money junkies happy, because we have to make the money junkies happy. They rule the world. All hail the money junkies. Bow down and genuflect to the money junkies. Because remember, debt is sacrosanct, even when it's created through fraud and corruption. We got that from Christine Lagarde herself in discussing Greece's debt situation, that even though half that debt was created with this underhanded currency swap deal between Goldman Sachs and Papandreou to try and sort of conceal how bad the situation was, while making it twice as bad. Doesn't matter if that's where the debt came from. You, the people of Greece, must sacrifice to pay that debt, because debt is holy, debt is sacrosanct. And even though the private central banking model means that the money to pay that debt does not exist and never did, you will just make whatever sacrifices we need. Hey, there's that wonderful little Parthenon there. That would look really great in front of our new Las Vegas hotel complex. We'll just take that as payment. Now, apparently Greece's health minister was on his way to visit a hospital and was accosted by protesters there, which got dangerously close to being violent. He was being shoved and hit by protesters. The people of Greece are very angry. And remember, Greece has a very strong self-image and heritage of democracy. And so they're standing up to this abusive government that's been imposed on them by the money junkies. Remember the hard time the Greeks gave the Nazis during that occupation. These are not people to be trifled with. Interesting article coming out of truthout.org. The richest 300 people on planet Earth have more wealth than the poorest 3 billion. In other words, the bottom half of the planet. Now, I have nothing against people wanting to be rich and working to do that by creating products that we voluntarily choose to buy, movies we voluntarily choose to go see or buy the DVD thereof. We hold up people like Steve Jobs and James Cameron as what capitalism is at its best. Especially James Cameron, personal hero of mine, great movies. I love everything that he's done. And I love what he's doing with his wealth. Ocean exploration. This is a guy we'd all like to aspire to be just like him. And we don't resent the fact of his wealth, because we voluntarily said, yes, you make good movies. I'm going to give you my money to go see your movie. And if you're rich thereby, we applaud that. The problem are the money junkies who game and corrupt the system to draw wealth out of the population without their permission, to become insanely rich and return nothing of any value to society in exchange of it. That's the core problem right there. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. Now, over at silverdoctors.com, they've got a very interesting article. This is from William K. And it's talking about the smash down of gold prices that we saw last month, where the price was just going down and down and down, and we were hearing from the so-called financial pundits, oh, you should get rid of that silver and gold right now. It's a poor investment. It's not solid. It's not secure. And now, again, what we speculated was going on is that the purpose for this smash down of gold prices was to prevent the major bullion banks from defaulting, like ABN AMRO has already done, by allowing them to buy physical gold at rock-bottom bargain prices. And the fact that they were harming the investment portfolios of every American who's invested in physical was completely not a factor. It was all about protecting the bullion banks, because we understand there is nowhere near enough physical gold to satisfy all these gold futures contracts that they've been selling recklessly. We know that foreign nations are very nervous about the gold they have on deposit at the New York Federal Reserve, Germany an obvious example. There was an interesting video where they were talking about gold repatriation, and I think this was over at Russia Today, and the commenter actually said right on the air, you know, for you foreign nations worried about your gold here in the New York Federal Reserve, I have one word for you: tungsten. So we're looking at COMEX running close to empty. JP Morgan has record lows in gold inventory against their paper claims. They have oversold those contracts, and they don't know what to do about it. Their only solution is to get the gold that you, the American people, are in possession of, by hook or by crook. And if they can't scare you and panic you into selling it, then somewhere down the road there's going to be another gold confiscation from the American people to support the financial system, just like Roosevelt did back in 1933. And that's another reason they're coming for your guns. Once they take away the guns and they start knocking on your door and say, we've got a record that you bought this much gold bullion someplace, which they do if you buy too much or sell too much in one lump, a record is made and sent to the Treasury Department. So it was an artificial price suppression. It's rigged. They rigged the gold prices to benefit themselves and harm you. I know, big shock. Just had a hard time to believe that. I saw this very disgusting article over at mysuncoast.com about this so-called homeless expert, saying that the problem with homelessness is there's too many free food programs. People should be out working to better themselves. And my response is, people want to work. There are no jobs out there. Ask any college graduate who just is drowning in student loan debt. And by the way, they're getting ready to raise the interest rates on that. And they've not been able to find the jobs all the college recruiters assured them would allow them to repay those loans easily. This is classic blame the victim propaganda, and it obscures a simple fact. Starting in the Bush administration and accelerating under Obama, according to a study done by the Hackett Group, the federal government gave large corporations tax incentives that encouraged them to relocate manufacturing to other countries. The loss of high-paying jobs made it impossible for Americans to pay their mortgages, which made it easier for the banks to take their homes, to keep those banks solvent after the collapse of the mortgage-backed security fraud. That little monthly payment you're making on your mortgage is not enough to save these banks from going into the red. They needed the entire appraised, inflated value of your home on their balance sheet right now. And that's where this whole foreclosure fraud firestorm came from, with document mills, robo-signing, fake notaries. And when the state's attorneys generals wanted to prosecute, the Obama administration came in and said, no, we're going to do a foreclosure fraud settlement, no prosecutions, no arrests, and everybody whose home was taken away from them through fraud will get a cash payment, which turned out to average about $300 for every family who lost their home. $300. Ooh, what a wonderful, generous settlement to compensate you for your home, the loss of your home where you built your life. The hungry and the homeless in this country are not lazy, by and large. They are not deserving of what has happened to them. They did nothing to justify what's happened to them. It was done to them by a government and financial system that ducks the blame by blaming the victims and dumping all the losses on ordinary people. That is fascism. And I keep hitting that because I'm still seeing out there where everybody's screaming how the Occupy movement are anti-capitalist. Oh, this group is anti-capitalist. Somebody even tried to claim that the Zimmerman, not quite a riot, a tantrum, mostly by agent provocateurs in Los Angeles, they were being anti-capitalist. Nobody's anti-capitalist in this country because we're not a capitalist economy any longer. We are a fascist economy. Under capitalism, if you make money, you get to keep it. And if you lose money through bad decision-making and business failure, you live with that debt. You go out of business. That's capitalism. Under socialism or communism, if you make money, it is taxed away from you to benefit society. If you lose money and go bust, society is taxed to cover the losses so you can pick up and start again. That's socialism. Under fascism, if you make money, you get to keep it. If you lose money, the population is taxed to cover the losses. That is fascism, and that is the system we have had in the United States for quite some time. As illustrated by TARP, bailouts, all these other programs where Wall Street is allowed to keep on doing what Wall Street loves to do, and every time there are losses, they are transferred onto the American people. We're going to grab a phone call here. Ross in Houston. Aloha, Ross. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. I listened to you talk about how there are no jobs out there, and unfortunately, a little bit more than a year ago, I lost my job on 65. Guess how much luck I've had finding a job. But anyway, be that as it may, they've taken away a tier of unemployment insurance. So while you see all these reports about how people are coming off of the unemployment, and that must mean the economy's better, there are no more benefits for people, and they don't even tell you. And no one is talking about it. It's real scary.
It is very, very scary, and that's one of the ways they fudge the unemployment numbers, because once you fall off the end of the benefits, you're not counted any longer in the unemployment numbers. We know the real unemployment in this country is something close to 40%, the real jobless rate. Only 47% of Americans have a full-time job, and as of June's job report, we're seeing the beginning of this trend caused by Obamacare, where full-time jobs are being ended and replaced with 2 or 3 part-time jobs to evade the Obamacare requirement. And so the actual employment condition is deteriorating, but the numbers look better, and that's all this government really cares about. Oh, we can show more job creation, but they're all part-time jobs. And we lost, I think, 250,000 full-time jobs in June.
Yeah. Well, thank you, sir. I just wanted to make sure that people are aware that just because you can hear about those numbers, they're not true. It's another gigantic lie.
It absolutely is. It absolutely is. I mean, this current economic depression, and we might as well call it that, is already far worse than the depression of the 1930s. And all our government can think to do is to get out of it the same way they got out of the last one. Let's start a world war. It'll be fun. There'll be big, loud noises and flashing lights to entertain us.
Right.
All right. Now, thank you very much.
Sir.
We're going to let you go here. Obama, earlier in this week, was out there trying to bolster his Obamacare program, insisting that it really ultimately will mean lower health care costs for Americans. Nobody is supporting that claim. We've seen insurance rates already starting up. Quality of service and quality of care is going down. Nancy Pelosi was out there saying, nobody here said costs were going to go down. So they're already backtracking from that. But Obama's out there trying to keep pushing his Obamacare agenda because it's the one thing he can point to that makes it look like he cares for ordinary people. And he's out there saying Obamacare is doing what it's designed to do, which is technically correct, because Obamacare was designed to enrich the health insurance companies who were loyal donors to Obama's many campaigns. The health insurance industry pretty much wrote all of Obamacare. And then everybody piled on saying, how can I use this to enrich myself? It is a disaster. And as I mentioned before, we are seeing employers slashing full-time jobs ahead of the Obamacare implementation because they don't want to pay the costs. They don't want to have to do all the paperwork hassles. And they can evade it all by having 2 or 3 temporary workers doing the equivalent of 1 full-time job. And you know what that's going to mean for people who are doing business with those companies? Poorer quality service. Because instead of dealing with somebody who's a permanent full-time employee of that company and knows what products and services they're selling and how to take care of them, you're going to have these part-time temporary workers who just came in last week to pick up a few hours, and they're not going to know what's going on. That was one of the things that resulted in the decline of Circuit City. Because Circuit City, when they originally started, it was a point of pride that all the people on that sales floor knew the products, knew how to use them, knew what went with what cables you needed. And then Circuit City fired all those long-time permanent employees because they were costing too much and brought in a whole bunch of new minimum wage clerks who were absolutely clueless about what they were selling and how to use it. With the result that people said, I'm not going to go there. I get sold the wrong thing all the time. And they went off and started doing their business someplace else. And it's another indicator of how our country has been completely destroyed. Our society has been destroyed by this quest for money. And there's nothing wrong with wanting to have profit and wealth. But to keep the society functioning as a whole, we've got to balance priorities. Yes, we want our buddies over here to get rich, but we also need to make sure the roads are in good condition, the bridges aren't collapsing, the electricity stays on, the infrastructure exists in a condition to support business activity, commerce, and communication. Got to make sure our schools are training kids to take the jobs we want to try and create in the future. And all those other considerations have just been completely suborned by that worshipping of the almighty Federal Reserve note, just a little piece of paper with ink on it, and it rules our lives mercilessly. And it's destroying what is best in the American nature, in the American culture. We've come to accept fraud and deception and cheating and lying and stealing as acceptable social behavior as long as it gets us a few more of those pieces of paper. And that's not really thinking about what's best for the country in the long term. The entire nation is thinking solely in terms of that next stockholders report. We got to make those stockholders happy. They're not happy. I'm not happy. No other considerations in there. More and more people asking. This is over at Beyond Prophecy Blogspot. Will Obamacare collapse? Well, it already is. Obama himself has kneecapped it by putting off some of the more onerous requirements until after the midterm elections next year. There's a dead giveaway. Apparently, Obama now wants to screen all individuals from age 15 to 65 for HIV, which sounds like a good idea, except that it's another way of forcing medical costs, forcing you to buy something you may not need. If you are a happily married human being, like I am, I know I don't need to have an HIV test. I'm not engaging in any of the high-risk activity. I don't fool around on my wife. I don't do intravenous drugs. I'm very careful about what toilet seats I sit on. I don't need an HIV test, and I don't need to pay for one, and I don't need my health insurance company to be forced to pay for one. It's my choice as a free citizen to decide what my medical care will or will not be. But one of the more onerous aspects of Obamacare is the government is going to decide what medical care you will get, what medications you will be forced to take, and more importantly, when medical care gets cut off, when you're no longer a profit-making opportunity. Now, speaking of money and the overreach of government dictatorship, longtime listeners know that I'm less than happy with the Adobe software company. I used to love their products. Back in the days of Photoshop 7, it was good product, happy to buy it. I had a horrible, horrible experience with Creative Studio 5, and I just blew it off my disk, and I've gone back to the older tools. Apparently, the latest version of Photoshop CS, their digital editing package, it's now on a monthly rental. You can't even buy it anymore. It has a built-in currency detector, so that if you scan a piece of currency, the software will say, oh, you're not allowed to do that. Now, sometimes I'll scan bits of currency to use to make a political statement, like my graphic that says, I'm a little piece of paper with ink on it and I control your life. It's a legitimate reason to do that. It's already been discovered that people can get around this currency detector. Not only is it annoying and interfering, it's not going to stop the counterfeiters. It's another piece of gratuitous, we are controlling your life to protect you from the bad people that does not work. Digital artist Kiara Woolley said you can simply cut and paste a banknote image from any other graphics utility into Photoshop. The currency detector won't activate. Advertising agency creative director Ann Shelburne found that she could scan currency in an older version of Photoshop and then import it into the new Photoshop without any problem by invoking Photoshop from another Adobe product or just scanning it in pieces and gluing it together. So it's useless, and it's an annoyance. It's like on your DVDs and Blu-rays when you put them in the machine and you have to sit there for 30 seconds reading that FBI warning about how it's illegal to make duplicates of that show that you're watching. Most people already know that, and most people aren't, in fact, going to break that copyright law. And those that are going to break that copyright, the notice isn't going to do a thing about it. It's just an annoyance. And it costs somebody some money somewhere to put that little FBI warning up there, and it's completely useless. The people who are pirating and copying DVDs and Blu-rays aren't paying attention to that. And those of us who are forced to sit there for 30 seconds and watch that little display about the FBI's authority, we're not likely to be committing those crimes they're talking about. They're just wasting our time to air their own small grandeur and remind us that the FBI is doing something of value to our society. Even though, as we mentioned earlier in the show, they're now having to go back and look at something like 27 death penalty cases that may have been wrongfully condemned because of FBI, what they're calling mistakes and errors. We know it's lies. I wish Adobe would, instead of enforcing currency scanning detectors, would put some of their time and effort into fixing the numerous bugs with the system, of which there are many. But so much of our resources are being diverted into security this and protection that, as to make the tools virtually unusable. And I went out to another company, ACVS I think it is, and I bought their entire Creative Suite. It was only like, it's under $100. Works great. Much simpler to use than Adobe. And it's not always nagging me about the law. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here, and we're going to finish up this hour with a story about PayPal, which of course is this gigantic online payment transaction system which tends to operate usually pretty well, but every once in a while they get a little wacko out there and they allow the personal political opinions of the owners to intervene. And apparently there's yet another scandal where there was a book that was available online, and it was called Iranian Living Room, which is very innocuous. It is simply a book of photographs depicting the interiors of Iranian homes. It's a decorator's guide, architectural guide. And for some reason, the book's customer orders were not being processed. And the publisher found out PayPal was banning the book because it had the word Iranian in it. And it was blacklisted in PayPal's dictionary. You can't say anything about Iran or Iranian and transact through PayPal. It's a book on interior decoration. Now, PayPal has backed off, and they've put the book on their special whitelist of things that are allowed to go through, despite the very obvious blacklisting that's going on out there. But PayPal has this long history of imposing their owners' political views on their business. If you remember back in 2004, they shut down the fundraising for Leonard Peltier, who was trying to, or his supporters were trying to mount a public education campaign about how the FBI railroaded Leonard Peltier into prison for the murder of some FBI agents, and it appears somebody else did it. There's a wonderful documentary about that called Incident at Oglala that you probably want to look at if you've not already seen. Then in 2008, during the primary season, when there were massive allegations of election fraud to keep Ron Paul out of the nomination up in New Hampshire, and a group called Granny Warriors was raising money to pay for a recount of that primary to validate whether or not Ron Paul was being discriminated against. And at the last second, when the money was supposed to go to the state government to pay for the recount, PayPal froze their account. So they missed the deadline, and the recount did not happen. And, of course, you'll remember back in 2003, PayPal and What Really Happened had a little bit of an argument where they froze our accounts, saying that we are finding the content of your website not up to our community standards. That one ended when I pointed out that PayPal was the payment system of choice for all these online porn sites, including one child porn site, at which point PayPal has been sort of behaving ever since. But when you're operating a business, I question whether or not you're allowed to simply go out and attack and harass your own customers because you may not agree with their politics. We're going to grab a real quick phone call here before the station identification. Oh, I'm sorry. There's the music. Scott, I'll take your call when we come back from station identification. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And for those of you watching on Justin TV, this gorgeous creature sitting here behind me is the lovely Lady Claire, who joins us every Friday to give us her unique perspective. But before we start with her talking points, we do have a caller waiting on the line. Scott in Wisconsin. Aloha. Welcome back to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Michael. Thank you, brother. And I thank you for giving me an opportunity to call in when you have your beautiful wife there. You know, Mike, I have a lot of respect for you, for how you have woke up from 7 years ago to this Ponzi scheme that we are living with right now. And I just wanted to comment with this lady down south about this unemployment. You can survive, people, but you have to take care of two words. You got to forget the wants and take care of the needs. And you can excel through these hard times because I've done it. Mike, with this situation in the Middle East, I pray for you to keep up on it. Because right now we see the chess, again, board with Russia supplying Assad, I believe, with the weaponry. And this is going to keep going on until there is a full war in Syria. But the bad, dangerous implications that you spoke about in the past, brother, about how when you exhaust your military and how you exhausted your military supplies, you resort to the big tunnels in the back of your yard. And people better take heed and pray right now for this situation in the Middle East, because if we do go in to a full-force war in Syria, it's going to be a war that will, like you said in the past, brother, that will make World War I and II look small. So I just wanted to bring that to you today, Michael, and I love you, brother. I love your wife. And I will continue to be on this front line like you, brother, until somebody puts a bullet between my eyeballs. I'm going to stay on the truth, and I'm going to keep marching on, brother, and I pray that you will too. So you take care and have a good weekend and a safe one.
All right, thank you very much. And, yeah, we're going to keep on going just as long as is necessary. And, again, the problem is the United States is military exhausted, financially exhausted. We don't have the troop strength to maintain prolonged conventional war. And invasion of Syria and Iran is going to mean war with Russia or China. Like we said before, there's a story where the U.S. has now authorized the Pentagon to plan for an eventual war with China. And, again, we don't have the manufacturing that allowed the United States to be on the winning side in World War I and World War II. And that means if this goes any further, sometime between now and final capitulation by the United States government, they're going to start turning those little brass keys in those missile silos. It's going to be a bad day for anybody not wearing 2 million sunblock. All right, Claire, what did you want to first talk about?
Well, I'd like to talk about an incident in Turkey that does relate directly to the situation in Syria. Apparently, Kurdish fighters who are independent and looking to carve out an independent Kurdistan between Syria and Turkey have seized control of a Syrian town on the border with Turkey, and they're battling Islamist rebel groups linked to al-Qaeda for control of oil fields in the northeast of Syria. And the Turkish government is very concerned about the emergence of an autonomous Kurdish region in Syria, which could embolden homegrown or Turkish militants of the Kurdistan's Workers' Party, PKK, which is fighting for its own autonomy in Turkey. This looks to me to be a very bad situation, and any U.S. and or Israeli intervention is just going to make it worse.
Well, it's already created a huge crisis there. We've got the hired mercenary armies are already factionalizing, fighting each other.
Yep.
Syria's regained control of most, if not all, of Aleppo. And this is why we've got John McCain and Dempsey out there saying, now's the time. U.S. has to invade. We've got to invade to bring peace and stability to the region. And, again, I think one of the reasons Obama was looking as distracted as he did, the agenda's fallen apart. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And I sort of wanted to recap on what I was saying before we went to the commercial break. If you will remember, not too long ago, General Wesley Clark basically went public on the U.S. war agenda in the Middle East. And he listed all these countries that were going to be conquered to bring them back to the petrodollar, to bring them back to private central banking. And the program was originally supposed to end in 2008. With the conquest of Iran. Well, here we are in 2013. Iran is still Iraning. Syria is proving problematic. The hired mercenary army has been trying to overthrow Assad for going on 3 years without success. Now they're devolving into fighting each other. It's all fragmenting over there. Afghanistan is starting to break free of U.S. control. Same thing with Iraq. It is inescapable at this point that the U.S. government agenda in the Mideast is falling apart. The wheels are coming off of it, and they're close to hitting the panic button. Before I get back to Claire, though, I want to take a phone call here. Andy in Utah. Aloha, Andy. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha to you, my brother. It's been about 8-10 years ago. I had you on regularly on a station here in Utah. I wanted to bring up something. I had tried earlier to alert you to this, that I had come across some early Randolph Hearst articles published. I believe the year would have been 1897, 1897, 98, somewhere just prior to the Spanish-American War, the sinking of the Maine. And these articles detailed that the very same thing had been attempted just 2 or 3 years prior in America, or in western Samoa in the Apia Harbor, where there was an article released in the California Hearst papers, several of them, and I had those in my hand as part of a group of articles. John W. Hart was the researcher who had collected these, microfilmed them, and I didn't know quite what to do with them, so I sent them with Sheriff Richard Mack when he went to Hawaii. His daughter was on some TV show over there, and he was supposed to give you this old book. I don't know if you remember it.
I do remember it, and I do still have it around here someplace.
That's got all the articles in it. That's all right. The one just want you to know.
Hello? Are you there?
Sorry. Yeah, I just got this congratulations, take part of a poll kind of thing interrupted me. Let me give you the skinny of it. It was a ship that supposedly went down. It was brought down supposedly by a German torpedo. They were trying to pick a fight with the Germans over it. They made up all these names. 298 brave soldiers from all these places in the United States. And it was published for 2 weeks. They got away with it. There were war preparations. There were some other associated articles that came later. It's all there in that book. And sorry for all the historical scratches. One of my little babies took a pen to one of those pages, I remember. But the whole thing came down when a new, faster ship arrived in western Samoa with a newspaper from, I believe it was San Francisco. And here's the front page article: Germans attack, the brave ship. I forget the name, but boy, if I could remember that, it might be there are other books that you could mention it. And all these lost at sea, lost in the, cowardly act. And they took this right across to the German embassy. What's up with this, And the German embassy was able to get the word back to Germany, and it was officially announced in diplomatic circles as what's the word? There's a special word that I remember. This has been 10 years ago. Canard.
Yes.
Canard. And that article, that came out in one article, no apologies. It was, what they lacked was a front page picture, lithograph picture of the smoke in the boat, the ship going down. And they would have possibly gotten away with it. But I think they modified and updated their plan. Now, just in retrospect, is my historical take on it. and 2 years later or some years later, if you find it, you'll know just exactly what we're talking about.
Yes.
And this next time around, they had a picture, but the very same thing. And it's all through these articles in the Hearst papers in the 1890s, and was part of this
all wars are started with lies. Nobody in a country wants to go to war. We don't really have an instinctive desire for war. It has to be sold to us. And again, you're right. William Randolph Hearst enjoyed his power and wealth and prestige because he was there promoting the official government line with regards to its expansionist agenda. And then, of course, when the USS Maine exploded in Havana Harbor from a coal bunker fire and an exploding magazine, and even the ship's captain, I think his name was Sigsbee, reported, my ship blew up because the ammunition magazine was touched off by a fire. And Hearst came out and said, oh no, Spanish mine, and the government said, yes, here's an incident, how do we use this to promote our agenda of war with Spain? And so remember, the Maine became the hue and cry to get us into the Spanish-American War. And, of course, subsequent investigations, one of them run by Admiral Hyman G. Rickover, the father of America's nuclear navy, examined the wreckage of the USS Maine and said there was no outside Spanish mine. It was an internal explosion from a design defect in the ship. But at the time, they simply said, oh, we can use this to push our war agenda. Same thing with the USS Maddox. An inexperienced sonar operator heard his own ship's propellers and said, oh, there's a torpedo out there. And it flashed up to Washington, D.C., and we got the story, North Vietnam attacking the USS Maddox in the Gulf of Tonkin, and Johnson knew it was a mistake because the captain of the Maddox had immediately sent a message, false alarm, stupid idiots, sonar operator. But once they had the headlines out there, torpedo attack in the Gulf of Tonkin, they moved forward with it to sell America on the war in Vietnam. All wars are started with lies. And they always have been.
Michael,
they always will be.
That's excellent. Say, I shared your podcast today on Facebook. That's awesome what you're doing. Looks like you got some legs now, and very entertaining as well as informative. Most excellent work. I'm going to be looking now for you for the failed false flag in Apia, Western Samoa. It was just Samoa, of course, in those days. So.
All right, I'll be looking at that. We're going to let you go here.
You'll be the one. Okay, take care.
All right, thanks an awful lot. And before we get back to Claire here, speaking of getting legs and getting the word out there, a reminder that starting on Monday, the Republic Broadcasting Network is available on the XDS satellite system. And that means your local AM and FM stations, most of whom have these satellite receivers. It's the new standard. They will be able to carry the programming from Republic Broadcasting on air in your community. So if you're tired of plugging into your computer or your laptop or your cell phone to try and listen to the program and you'd like to hear it on your car radio, please help us out. Contact your local AM and FM stations and ask them to get in touch with republicbroadcasting.org about carrying our programming on their station. We're going to get the word out there because of all of Floodgate, IRS, NSA, Department of Justice scandals, and so forth. Americans are finally asking important questions. We have to be out there to help guide them to the answers. Claire, what's the next thing you wanted to talk about?
Well, the next thing I want to talk about is a potential designate for the Homeland Security Secretary job that Janet Napolitano will be leaving in September. And one guy whose name has come up is the New York Police Department Commissioner Ray Kelly. And the reason this is more than a little bit of a concern is that Mr. Kelly is perhaps best known nationally for presiding over a sharp increase in the number of stop and frisks conducted by NYPD officers every year. And during Kelly's most recent tenure as police commissioner, which began in 2002, there have been over 5 million. Let me back up and read that number again. 5 million stop and frisks, according to the New York Civil Liberties Union. Over 86% of those who were stopped were either black or Latino.
Well, I just, without even getting into the race issue, this idea that the police could just stop you at random and frisk you just in case, again, that's a violation of the Fourth Amendment to the Constitution right there. If you don't have probable cause supported by oath or affirmation, you have no business touching that person. And to see somebody who already has a past history of flagrant violation of the Bill of Rights considered for the head of the Department of Homeland Security. It's a red warning flag for all the talk about, oh, we're sorry that you're all upset with all of this dictatorship.
Yep.
Clearly, the federal government is considering, or has as a policy, continuing on this same path of total surveillance, total control, total police state.
And even worse to come.
Absolutely. What's next on your list?
Well, the question about the Guantanamo hunger strike, which is still going on, and people are being physically force-fed through an NG tube. I don't know how many of you have ever had that experience if you've been in hospital and couldn't eat for one reason or the other. But it's a darned unpleasant, even in the most skilled hands, way to be getting nutrition.
Basically, they strap you onto a board and they shove a tube up your nose and work it down the back of your throat into your stomach, hopefully not your lungs.
Yes.
And, just pour in whatever they think that you need. And it's an absolutely brutal situation. And you need to remember, the federal government understands that most of those people who are being treated like this in Guantanamo are innocent of any wrongdoing whatsoever.
They've never been accused of a crime.
They've never been accused or charged or convicted. The government just has them down there, torturing them, force-feeding them, just to prove how butch they all are.
And there is a gentleman I'd like to bring to our audience attention.
Well, we're going to have to do that after this commercial break.
Okay,
we're going to be back
thank
after
you.
these words from our sponsors. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And Claire, you were talking about in the aftermath of this ongoing force-feeding campaign in Guantanamo, you had a comment about somebody that you were concerned about the policy.
Yeah. A gentleman by the name of Representative Mike Pompeo, a Kansas Republican who recently visited Guantanamo and has been trotted out to cheerlead the wonderfulness of force-feeding. And the other thing he made clear was that the U.S. government has no current plans to free 85 prisoners who have already been cleared for release, claiming that many of them could still pose a threat to national security.
Well, they may not have been terrorists when they were arrested, but by golly, they're going to be terrorists now after the way they've been treated here.
And what he's talking about, this is very little to do with U.S. national security, but everything to do with U.S. national embarrassment as a country which allegedly supports the notion of human rights, allegedly abides by laws, and sort of has a nodding acquaintance with due process.
Well,
go ahead.
Yeah, the reason these 85, even though they have been cleared for release, the reason the administration, and it's not just Republicans, it is also the Democrats, they don't want these people to go out there, is because things have been done to them far worse than waterboarding. And they do not want these individuals going back to their home countries and talking to the media and showing the scars on their body. And so they're going to be kept there until they get really depressed and commit suicide, because otherwise, the government's going to be embarrassed by them. But again, 85 of these people in Guantanamo have officially been cleared for release. They did not do anything wrong to the United States of America, and they're being kept away from the public because they're a political embarrassment with this lame excuse that, well, after we've tortured them and abused them, they might not like the United States of America, and that's justification for keeping them locked up and force-fed. And it's absolutely absurd.
It's sick. And apparently the people who are supporting Gitmo and its continuation justify torture and yet want it kept completely suppressed and away from Americans and the rest of the world.
Well, we're definitely there in Fourth Reich territory. We have concentration camps, we've got torture, we've got wars started with lies, massive propaganda, Gestapo tactics against the American people. Yeah, we're pretty much there. I think this government's been reading the book Dictatorship for Dummies by Adolf Hitler.
Yeah. I'd like to bop over, if I may, to the situation with China and Japan right now.
Go bop away.
That is getting very nasty very quickly. Japan has allegedly ordered geological survey ships to prepare for possible deployment after the Chinese were reportedly detected drilling in Japanese waters near the disputed areas of the Senkaku Islands in the East China Sea. And Japan has warned China not to expand its gas exploration in that area, following a media report according to which Chinese state-run oil companies plan to develop 7 new gas fields in the sea. And, Mike, without some thoughtful, intelligent, and good faith negotiations, this situation is about to get intensely ugly very quickly.
Well, again, as we reported earlier in the show, the U.S. government has now officially authorized the Pentagon to make plans and preparations for potential war with China. I don't know why they're squabbling over these islands. If they want all that natural gas, we've got tons of it bubbling up out of the ground in Louisiana from those sinkholes.
Yes.
You know, they're all saying, oh, the natural gas is pouring out of here. Well, cap it. You know, cap it. That way we don't have to frack. We don't have to worry about China and Japan arguing over their natural gas. You know, it's absurd.
It's nasty, and unless we have some real adults in the room in Beijing and in Tokyo who can kind of check their testosterone at the door and resolve this like adults, the reason it could get so nasty is that United States officials have stated that any challenge to these islands would mean that the U.S. would have to defend Japan militarily if China attacks.
Oh, yeah. It's all,
double plus on good.
All Japan's fault here. We didn't really want to send your kids to make war on China, but our good friends Japan were being attacked. And we know the United States wants war with China because they want to end the threat of the gold-backed yuan to the U.S. dollar as the international trade and reserve currency. That's what it's all about. The willingness to incinerate the surface of planet Earth in nuclear fire, all to protect that little piece of paper with ink on it. That's what this is really all about.
It bites. It absolutely
Yes, it
bites. I'd also like to talk about a story that is getting virtually no coverage on the corporate media. And apparently, California prison guards are retaliating against hunger strikers in their jails. Now, this is big. It's about 30...
What are they doing, sending them to bed without their dinner?
No, Michael. Inmates' lawyers are saying the health of men is at risk amid allegations prisons are using cold temperatures to snuff out protests. They're blasting cells with cold air, confiscating legal documents, and in one case, banning lawyers, according to legal representatives and relatives.
Now, that is absolutely illegal.
Yeah.
And basically it amounts to, these are torture tactics. Use of cold air, deprivation of things. These are considered, you know, acts of torture by the California prison guards against the prisoners because the prisoners are using a hunger strike to call attention to the very inhumane conditions in those prisons. Because we have the most incarcerated population on Earth, and the prisons are crowded. There's no question about it. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And Claire, what else did you want to talk about?
Well, I'd like to go back to this issue of the hunger strike at the California prisons. This is a big deal. It's been going on for 12 days as of Friday, and an estimated 30,000 inmates in 33 jails launched the hunger strike on June 8th. It is the biggest in California's history against solitary confinement and other conditions that they said were tantamount to torture. And I have to look at this. There was a California Department of Corrections report that was released in October of 2012, and they were celebrating that the recidivism has cut down from 65.1 the year before to 63.7 in 2012. But come on, 63% recidivism, I'm sorry. I mean, that's a nasty number any way you look at it.
Well, in the current economy, I mean, especially, you know, somebody gets released from prison, they've done their time, they've paid their debt to society, they go on out there, they try and find a job, there are no jobs, they're hungry, maybe they've got families, what are they going to do? Yeah, they're going to go back into crime. Now, obviously, I don't approve of crime, but I do understand you know, what's going on here, especially if you're, we know that a lot of employers will not hesitate to run full background checks on potential employees. If you've got a criminal record,
you're dead meat.
Your prospects for finding,
yeah.
You know, and if you want to reduce the recidivism rate, the way to do it is to make sure, along with bringing back the jobs for ordinary law-abiding Americans, that we make sure there are jobs available as part of the program of rehabilitation. You look at other nations like Norway that have very low prison populations and very low recidivism, and that's because they get the people into prison, they serve their time, there is a program to reintegrate them with society.
And rehabilitate. There's job training in the prisons where they can go out and they can make a good living, and the jobs are there to take advantage of that training.
And that's why you see a much better situation in these other countries. The United States has the highest per capita incarceration rate of any industrialized nation. They just throw them into prison. There's no vocational training there. Basically, it's a graduate school for criminality. They hang around all day with other criminals saying, how did you do this? How did you do that? And when they're released, they're simply dumped back out on the street. And there's no attempt at reintegration. And not just for our prison population, for our military, who are coming back from the war zone, doped up on SSRIs with that horrible, traumatic experience of going out and killing innocent people. They're dumped back into society. There's no attempt to, no funding to reintegrate them, bring them back into a normal, polite society. And then we wonder why so many things are going wrong in this country. Because all the wealth of this nation is being sucked out by the private central bankers, who are living lives of unimaginable wealth and luxury because of this little screwed up Ponzi scheme banking system that they've managed to impose on us.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I hope that prison authorities are going to look at this with some degree of honesty, because if not, you're going to have prisoners dying, and you're going to have prisoners rioting, and that's going to be nasty.
Well, that's already happening. Before I let you go on to your next story, we've got a caller waiting on the line. Dean in Colorado. Aloha, Dean. Thank you for waiting. What's on your mind?
Hello, Michael. First-time caller. I really watch what's going on. I enjoy your show. It's so informative. Getting back to the war with China that you were discussing, this thought came to my mind, and I'd like to hear your views on it. The United States and Japan go to war with Japan. Is there any chance of winning that war?
It all depends on what you mean by winning. I mean, obviously, the United States is not going to be able to invade mainland China and take it over, because China has more people in uniform than we have people living in the entire United States of America.
And they conscript.
That's going to be happening here very soon as well. I mean, the draft bill is already sitting in committee in Congress, ready to go the instant they feel they can sell it to the American people. And this new draft law will draft young women into combat roles right alongside men. Victory for feminist equality and so forth. The question is, victory as defined by the United States government right now is to smash China's economy to the point where the yuan is no longer seen as a threat to the U.S. dollar. And to accomplish that, they don't need to invade China proper. They just need to drain it in a prolonged war. Would it go nuclear? It very well might. Both the United States and China are nuclear powers. Both the United States and China have ballistic missiles that will reach each other's countries. And so it's a very, very unstable situation. But the goal of war with China isn't to take over and conquer China. It is simply to wreck China's economy through war in order to force them back to what Kissinger calls the international system. That was the reason for the Britain's war against the United States in 1812. If not to recolonize, to force them back to private central banking, and it did work. Coming out of the War of 1812, the U.S. government was forced to charter the second bank of the United States. So it's all about the money. It's all about maintaining our particular piece of paper and ink, dominion over all other pieces of paper and ink.
Well, I appreciate that answer, and I agree with you wholeheartedly. But I look at our involvement in Iraq and Afghanistan and is find a young men and women that went over there to fight with good intentions, serve their country. We didn't do such a great job of,
No, the war agenda is in serious trouble. The big problem with Iraq, of course, was that victory is impossible in terms of the public reasons given for the war. There were no weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. Iraq had nothing to do with 9/11. Iraq was not aiding al-Qaeda. And so in terms of the public presentation of the war with Iraq, victory in the political sense is impossible because none of the stated goals can be accomplished. And again, we're looking at the way Syria is crumbling, Turkey is in turmoil, Egypt's in turmoil. The whole region is being plunged into chaos, out of which any kind of systemic post-war control is going to be virtually impossible. And now they're talking about war with China, and it's all because China's yuan is now seen as a threat to the U.S. dollar. China and Australia are doing direct currency swaps without going through the dollar. China and New Zealand are getting ready to do direct currency swaps without going through the dollar. This whole U.S. war agenda, it's all for the bankers to force the world back into going through the U.S. dollar to do any commerce at all. It's an updated version of King George III's Currency Act. You're not allowed to do business with your own currency. You will use banknotes borrowed from our bank. You will be dependent on our bank. That led to the American Revolution, and now it's leading to a new world war.
And, you know, Michael, I'll just say this and then let someone else have a chance to call in. I'm aware of what you just said, and I tell people, and they look at me like I have two heads.
Well, there are people. Yeah, well, there are still a lot of people out there who desperately want to believe that America, the good guys, that we're still the greatest nation on earth, and we would never, ever carry out a war of aggression for less than honorable reasons. But that segment of the American population is rapidly shrinking.
Mm-hmm.
I think so. Thank you, Michael.
All right, you got it. Claire, what's next on your list? We're almost out of time.
Well, speaking of China, a very interesting development is going on. There was a recent meeting of foreign ministers of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization at Cholpon-Ata, Kyrgyzstan, where the Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi emphasized how the group has pushed toward regional cooperation. And they are going to be drawing into the organization India, Iran, and Pakistan. Now, this is a major blunt to the U.S.'s Asia pivot. And with the U.S. government dealing with death by 1,000 blows, Benghazi Gate, IRS Gate, AP Gate, and being utterly broke on top of everything else, I think the timing for the Shanghai Cooperation Organization's desire to include these countries is very excellent.
And remember, this is another economic bloc that
Yes.
is choosing to function independent of the dollar.
Mhm.
It's just like BRICS. I'm not surprised that India is a member of both organizations.
Mhm.
These are growing multinational consortiums, if you will,
Right.
that say we're going to run our economy the way we think it should be run, with banking systems we choose, and with our own currencies.
Mhm.
And the reality is that for every one nation the U.S. tries to conquer to bring back onto the dollar, 6 other nations break away.
Mhm.
And it's definitely a losing proposition. It's
Mhm.
not unlike ancient Rome, where as Rome began to lose their legions like they did in Germany, the provinces started breaking away and going independent. One new phenomenon we have is that nations ostensibly conquered by the United States, like Iraq and Afghanistan, are sitting there realizing the United States can't reconquer them for at least a couple of years.
Mhm.
And contrary to simply going along with the U.S. agenda for economy and banking, they're starting to say, well, we're free and clear to go ahead and do what we want to do because the U.S. is not going to be able to sell a new invasion of our country to the American people. You know, we've got to reinvade Afghanistan. We've got to reinvade Iraq. Nobody's going to go along with that.
Absolutely not. And this organization's clout in trade and probably mutual defense is going to be very keenly felt. And I would like to hope that Iran's membership in this organization would make the U.S. government and military think twice about attacking it overtly.
Well, I would have thought that they would have had second thoughts from the statements, the very unequivocal statements made by both Russia and China,
Yeah.
that Iran is a key trading partner of their
Mhm.
spheres of influence. Russia has point-blank told the United States, if you go into Syria or if you go into Iran, we will turn it into the new Vietnam and we
Mhm.
will grind the United States down to dust in a war of attrition. Russia has the resources to do that. The United States does not have the resources to survive a prolonged war of attrition.
No.
Another reason to be worried about mushroom clouds popping up all over the place.
Yes. Now I'd like to go very briefly to the end of the segment with something that happened in Kashmir. 6 civilians were killed and more than 2 others were wounded on Thursday after border guards of India's border security force fired at protesters. And what happened apparently was that there was an invasion of a mosque in Kashmir by the Indian troops. The imam, their spiritual leader, got beaten up badly. And all of the injured had been taken to hospitals.
Can you say provocation?
Yeah, I can. And I am asking for a moment of moral courage and clarity right now on the part of the Indian government. And I'm asking it to fulfill its long-awaited promise to the Kashmiri people to hold a referendum, which they were promised, but which has never been fulfilled, to ask if they want to stay part of India, become independent or autonomous, or join Pakistan. And I will share with the Indian government that the cost of dishonoring this promise may well be a catastrophe for both the Kashmiri people and the Indian government, because the tensions are roiling here. They are getting very, very, very bad.
All righty. Do you have anything else?
I think that was it.
All right. I'm going to pull down your microphone here, and we're coming up here. Got about 15 minutes to go on our Friday show, looking at the headlines going on here. Apparently, down in Texas, there is a nuclear weapons bunker leaking radiation. But Texans are urged not to panic. Little radiation is good for you. Remember when they were actually trying to sell us that one following Fukushima? Now, little radiation won't hurt you. And they're trying to basically get that leak underway. More trouble for the Boeing Dreamliner. 787 on the way to Tokyo is turned back to Boston when a fuel pump quit working. Boy, oh boy, talk about just nothing but problems. Boeing is another company here in the United States of America. Used to make a quality product the world looked up to. And their latest offering, the Dreamliner, overmanaged, too much subcontracting to other, whatever the situation. It is a plane that is acquiring a very vile reputation. We're already seeing where airline booking agencies are literally being told by flyers, give me any airplane but the 787. Major, major disaster. Needless to say, earlier today, Fox News was again pushing the carbon agenda. Oh, it's sweltering all across America. You know, it is July. It is summer. This is when it gets hot. And they made the statement that Alaska is the only state in the United States not up in the 90s. Wrong. We're only at 85, actually 84 here on the island of Oahu. But Fox is making these sweeping statements. The entire country is in the 90s. And they're still out there trying, oh, global warming, global warming, global warming. The reality is, the hard, raw data, 71% of the United States is below normal average temperatures so far in 2013. Still all about agenda, still all about carbon taxes. Still more scam, more lies. Is there anything the government isn't lying about? As far as the corporate media is concerned, they're lying about everything except the weather and the sports scores, and they're not even all that good on the weather, especially because of the carbon agenda. All righty, let's see what's going on. Oh, by the way, for those of you of a religious bent who have online access, apparently indulgences have returned. Here in the 21st century, the Vatican will reduce the amount of time you must spend in purgatory after you die if you follow the Pope on his Twitter account. This is not a joke. This is real. Follow the Pope, get forgiven for your sins. All righty. If you follow whatreallyhappened.com on Twitter, you get informed. By the way, apparently down in Polish Hill, landmark church got hit by lightning and suffered damage in a recent storm there. There's a confidence builder. I remember when I was down in Australia many years ago and I was witness to this incredible hailstorm. And there was this church with these magnificent stained glass windows, and every single one got taken out by these hailstones, half the size of golf balls. I don't know, were you messing around with the altar boy or something like that? Now, here's an interesting little story. Apparently, there's been another case where a massive fish die-off has occurred. And just fish floated to the top of this lake. And they said, oh, tests show the lake has no oxygen at all. Oh, what is causing this? Well, we know, I know what's causing it already. If you have methane in the presence of oxygen, it will decompose into carbon dioxide and water. So this fracking is seeping up methane all across the country. It's getting into the lakes and streams, and the methane will take the oxygen out of the water, and the fish will die. Now, we're going to take a break for commercials. Final comment on this when we come back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show, and we're talking about this latest fish die-off. Now, we've been reading about this all across the country, where all of a sudden people will come down to their local lake or stream, and the fish are just dead, floating on the surface of the water. Tests show there is no oxygen in the water, and the fish simply died off. And there's a very reasonable, simple explanation, and that's methane. From all the fracking, we know it's showing up in the tap water. It's also seeping up through the ground. And if you put methane near oxygen, it will decompose into water and carbon dioxide, which means the tests of the lake water aren't going to show the presence of methane. The carbon dioxide dissolved or bubbled up into the atmosphere, and you're not going to know that these water molecules were created through methane and oxygen interaction versus water that was there all along. So I posted this comment to this CBS story about the latest fish die-off, and immediately got jumped on by 20 commenters who posted comments like this one. Quote, "You're an environmental loon. Sorry, not sure what educational background you have, but I wouldn't be surprised if it's either less than a high school diploma or multiple PhDs. Without the high school diploma, you're just a moron. With the multiple PhDs, you don't live in the real world. You live in a virtual world dominated by wildly inaccurate mathematical models predicting all sorts of impending disasters that never quite materialize. I work with both type of people every day. Either way, you're a loon. I suspect this is some type of algae bloom or other." End quote. Algae puts oxygen into the water, not out. That's his first mistake. And from the sheer speed with which I got ganged up on, I began to wonder what's going on with the Discus commenting system, which is now the most widely used commenting forum on corporate media websites. Okay? And so I went over and I looked at Discus privacy policy, and they state right in there, Discus monitors comments and reserves the right to remove information or material for any reason or no reason, blah, 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 blah. Now, Discus allows you to use their platform for free, and they don't have advertising. Where are they getting all their money? They've got like 100 people working there, and they're hiring more people right now. And it raises the possibility that Discus has basically become the gatekeeper for online comments, and how they make their money is by working for government agencies and public relations firms, where if somebody's commenting something that raises a red flag, like fracking, that they send immediate alerts so that the public relations people can jump in and say, "Oh, you're a loon, it's completely nonsense, you don't understand chemistry." Because it happened way too fast to be explained by word of mouth. Remember how the Israeli government had their megaphone system running? Public relations firms do exactly the same thing. And with all this NSA surveillance on our activity for the benefit of corporations, it looks to me like Discus very easily could be making their revenue stream by keeping an eye on comments and sending out alerts to allow public relations firms and online propagandists to jump in and scream, "You're a loon, you're an anti-Semite," which means we're pretty much over the target. All right, that is it for our show for this week. We're going to be back here on Monday on XDS, getting the word out there. Please tell your local radio stations to carry the programming from Republic Broadcasting. So we're going to get out of here and get something useful done this afternoon. Until Monday, stay safe, stay well, stay angry, stay skeptical, make good choices. Please support Republic Broadcasting. Without your help, this XDS deal would not have happened. We thank you all, and aloha in America.